Et je vais vous présenter immédiatement notre prochain invité, qui est réalisateur, qui est coloriste, qui était ici l'année dernière, il y a 1 an exactement, pour nous présenter Resolve 9. Alors, pour nous présenter la nouvelle version, qui est mon coup de cœur du NAB, la nouvelle version 10 de DaVinci Resolve, je vous présente Alexis Van Hurkman.
Hello. Hello? Am I on? Oh, hey. It's my own voice. Amazing. So, bonsoir. This is my yearly pilgrimage, apparently, to Montreal, which is great. I really love it here, and any chance to get here is a good chance for me. So I'm here to talk about DaVinci Resolve 10. I'll just preface it by saying this is a preview. So this hasn't even gone to beta yet, just to let you know how early this is. This is the same version of Resolve that I showed at NAB, so this truly is the post-NAB experience. And as Matthew mentioned on, I believe, Twitter, this is, in fact, the only copy of DaVinci Resolve 10 in all of Canada. So this is a pretty special evening. So one of the things I want to mention, just as a preamble, before I launch into showing you a blizzard of features, because there's a lot of stuff to see, is that the main goal of DaVinci Resolve 10 is, as it has been for a number of releases, interoperability. I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard about the new online editing tools that are being added in this version. And that's really a cornerstone of DaVinci trying to make this application a happier part of your workflow in terms of dealing with situations where you're bringing in projects from, say, Final Cut 10. In this case, I'm cutting a little bit ahead of the demonstration I gave at NAB, because here in Final Cut 10, you can see I've got a timeline that's filled with offline media that was generated as part of the process of creating dailies from the camera original raw media. And you can see all of these clips have window burns that were generated by Resolve, as well as all of the synced audio that we're hearing, that I'll turn off in a little bit. And I also have some edited effects that have been added by the editor, some of which have been done, some of which are not. But in any event, the producer has decided that it's time for this project to move on to color. It's time to start finishing. So I'm going to, with this edit selected, export an XML file. I'm going to export it to my documents, and I'm going to call this Montreal. And now I'm going to go ahead and quit out of Final Cut 10 into DaVinci Resolve 10. So going into my project manager, I have the original project in which I set up all of the dailies. It's this NAB 2013 Prezo backup project. If I open that up and look inside of these bins, you can see I've got all my camera original media with no window burns ready to go. So jumping into the newly renamed edit page, all I have to do to reconform the offline edit with all of that offline media that I'd previously generated to the camera original media that I preserved in this database is to right-click, choose Import, AAF, EDL, and XML, and the process is the same for each one of these formats. And I simply go to my Documents folder and I look for that Montreal project. Now, I want to make sure I turn off automatically import source clips, because I don't actually want to re-import the offline media. That wouldn't serve my purposes. So I turn this off, click OK, and there I go. If I play through this, you can see no window burns. I have, in fact, in one command, gone ahead and resynced, reconformed to my camera original media. Now, down here at the bottom of the timeline, you can see the first of the new features that I'm going to show off, and that's the existence of audio tracks. You now have audio tracks directly from within the Resolve edit page. And the first thing I'm going to do is add another audio track because I've got a mix file. So I'm going to edit that down here. A new track's created. If I play through, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the camera original audio because that's not anything you want. Now I've got synchronized playback. It's not a hidden mode. It's not anything I need to invoke using a contextual menu key. It's just something that's there and available for me to use. Whether I'm importing additional media or whether I'm layering in multiple files to output later on, because this is a great way to set up for tape outputs or for digital output. So now that I've got this set up, the director rolls in and I hear that, all right, there are a few effect shots that needed to be taken care of, but first off, there's a change that was made during the mix that I want to address in the edit. Right here, there's a pair of shots. And they decided to bring in that rev a little bit early, and I don't know what happened. There was an edit there before, and somehow it got slipped. Can you fix this? And I say, well, now, yeah, it's really easy, because with the selection tool selected, I also have a roll mode, so I can just roll that over, and I'm done. Now, while I'm talking about editorial changes, and again, a lot of these are not new features to the world, but they're new to Resolve. If you remember, previous versions of Resolve were very much focused on the color grading experience, and the previously named conform page was more about importing XMLs, EDLs, AAFs, and just making sure that you had the media correct. Now, there's an integrated trim tool that lets you make much more substantive changes very easily. And because this is an online environment, because you're probably focused on making a blizzard of changes very quickly, the clickability of all of these controls has been carefully considered. So for example, with this integrated trim tool, if I click in the thumbnail of the clip, I'm slipping the media. But if I click down in the name bar, I'm sliding the media. And it's a live timeline, so I see everything updating as I'm doing it. I also have ripple modes, so I can do ripple edits. And actually, I'm going to zoom out so you can see the whole timeline update as I'm making these changes. So it's very responsive, but again, the tool set's very focused on prepping the timeline for the things that you need to do. Moving on, going back to the selection tool, I have a few clips, and I'm going to turn off the audio because it's a little bit irritating while I'm scrubbing around. I have a few effects clips that didn't get laid in, but fortunately those effects have been provided me. Now, one of the things that DaVinci bore in mind is that if you talk to 4 different editors about how they want to take care of a particular editorial change, you'll get 4 different answers. So in supporting a more online editorial workflow, we've gone ahead and incorporated many familiar editing modes. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to go ahead and select that whole. I'm going to load the effect clip. And in this case, I'm going to jump to the beginning there, and I'm going to line up using that road marker as my reference. Hit an in key. Before I do that, I want to choose the right track. Go ahead and do my 3-point edit. Now, one thing I want to draw your attention to, working online, you're in a hurry, you don't want to be held up by silly error messages, and you may notice I've got a gap at the end of that editing, the end of that edit I just made, and it gave me a gap instead of a warning, instead of telling me, oh, you don't have enough media to fill the hole, now what? And of course, the first thing you want to say is, well, of course there's enough media in that hole. I chose the clip. Turns out there isn't. It goes ahead and just edits the clip in there and lets me deal with the aftermath. So I decide, okay, that's fine. I know there's handles in this clip, so I'll just slip it around, pop it out, and now I've got the edit that I want, and I move on. So it's all about speed. It's all about taking care of the things that you need to take care of. Going through here, here's another edit. I'm going to mark that hole, and I'm going to back time this one. Maybe that's the best way to solve this particular problem. So I go ahead and find that last frame. That looks plausible. Set an out point. Drop that in. Done. These were things that were not at all easy to do in the previous version of Resolve, but these new editing tools make it a heck of a lot handier. So, moving on. Another problem. Nobody wants to lock their cuts. As much as I beg my clients, please lock your edit, bring it in, we'll get it done, there's always some last-minute issue that comes up. And in this case, the director says, hey, you know, I thought this was a good idea, this double take shot. It seemed really cool when we did it, but I slept on it, and in retrospect, I don't really like the way it turned out. Can we re-edit that sequence to maybe use a slow motion version of the first clip to cover the whole thing? And I go, sure, no problem. Do a lift edit, go ahead and stretch that out to fill the gap. I play through, and the director doesn't like the motion, so I right-click, change speed, set it down to 30%. He wants it really slow. Now I'm hearing he doesn't like that fishtailing in the beginning of the shot, so I choose my trim edit tool. Now I could elect get past that point. I can elect to do everything with my hands on the mouse, but the other thing I can do, playing through here, that sync point isn't quite right. I also have the ability to select edit points and nudge them around. So I can nudge that over, done. All of this so I can get through project prep quickly, get to my grade, get it done, and go home and have a happy life. So, of course, the problem with adding tools is once the director sees what you can do, they start wondering if there's more stuff you can do. So, of course, the next thing I get asked is, you've taken care of all my editorial problems. I have this title I need. Is there any way we can just sneak that in here rather than doing it back at the NLE? And I say, well, in this new version, yes, I can. So, again, I select this clip. This time, I'm going to create a new track, choose that as the destination track. I now have a set of simple title generators. So I'm going to choose this basic title, overwrite that in, open it up, edit it, and it's going to be professional car and track, sure. Shrink it down, because disclaimers have to be small. Drop it down to the bottom. Done. I'm all set. So then the next thing I hear is, okay, we've played through this, but by the way, that slow motion clip you added, that was great. It's a little bit choppy. Is there anything you can do about that? And I say, well, now in Resolve, I can. So I open this clip up, and in this new inspector, down at the bottom, I've got a real-time process pop-up. So I can go ahead and choose optical flow. And now I have not real-time, but pretty close to real-time. And bear in mind, this is an iMac. Pretty close to real-time optical flow retiming for nice glassy, smooth, slow motion. And that's all set up. And by the way, I could keep going. I know this is going out to tape, so I've got bars and tone generators I can set up. I can add a slate with the same title generator and really get the timeline in a really good place so that we can do a true proper finishing job and not leave anything out. So that's all great. And one thing I want to put in your head so I don't forget it later is all of these tools that you're seeing here are going to be available in the light, free version of Resolve 10 as well as the full version of Resolve 10. So this is something that's going to be available to everybody. So with this done, I'm going to jump into the color page. And now it's time to start looking at some grading features. It's not all about online editing. Sometimes we have to grade as well. Now, because I moved this project and conformed it back to the original database, I had taken the liberty of working out some simple grades to do my OneLight dailies creation with. And I've got those grades here. It's another good reason to conform back to your original database. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this grade to this clip. That's where I started. And I can start going down the line and using this grade. But sooner or later, I get to a point where I realize, oh, right, that was from a different camera. That's not going to work. And I'm going to need to start doing my job and actually matching these shots. So in this case, I want to match this shot to this shot. I could do this with a still, but there's a new feature that they've added that makes all of this a lot easier to manage. If I go into the View menu and choose Split Screen, Selected Clips, I can now command-click 2 clips and see them side by side, and it's sort of a playhead-style presentation. So it's live. I can actually see them move. And by the way, this goes to my video out interface. So I can look at this on the Hero monitor while I'm making my adjustments. So I've got this set up. I'll jump into my color wheels and start working on trying to match it up, make things look the way I want them to, like that. And I can't stop there. I can actually add more and more and more and more to fill that up, play my way through. They all move together as much as they can. And while I'm at it, I also have the ability to go ahead and limit the timeline to only the selected clips. Say the client and I really want to focus on one scene and we don't want to have to worry about navigating around. We can focus on just this scene's worth of clips. This also works in the Lightroom, which is, while not a new feature, greatly enhanced by the ability of all of these extra filtering modes that are available. And we've also added the ability to show the color controls right inside of the Lightroom. So you can go ahead and do your grading here even if you don't have a control surface. Please, feel free to clap. It's very wonderful. So yeah, now I'm in here and I can start copying grades around like I used to be able to do. But I can also go ahead and do a little bit of a tweak grade, if that's something I decide I want to do. And I can toggle back and forth. It's just a very nice way of setting up the UI. And by the way, the lightbox can also be sent to video out via this little button up here in the corner. So everything you're matching, everything you're balancing can be seen on the Hero display, which is huge. Now, there's one thing I didn't have time to show at NAB. I'm going to go back to viewing all clips. I'm going to go back to this clip, and I'm going to start adding versions because the client wants to try different grades. So I have a few different looks that I've got set up. Maybe I'll try that look, try that look. And at this point, the client says, great, I've got all these looks, but I just can't make up my mind. And I say, you know what, that's really not a problem because I can show you all of them on the Hero monitor. Pick the one you want. Whatever you like, we'll do it. So very, very flexible ways of interacting with your client and dealing with this kind of decision making, which is a huge part of the grading process. So that's all fun. Now that I've made you eat your vegetables, it's time to look at some of the more fun stuff. Starting with, and I'm going to go back to version 1, starting with some of the huge enhancements that have been made to the window palette. So those of you who are familiar with previous versions of Resolve know that the custom curve could be a little bit finicky. And one thing people were asking for, and in fact, I'm going to go ahead and blow this up full screen, was for a more precise drawing mode. So the first new window features is simply the ability to draw more Bezier-style precision curves. I'm going to go ahead and just quickly trace this car, not for art, but for time. So I've got that set up, and say I want to do something crazy to the background that doesn't involve the car. So with that set up, I go into my tracker, track that forward, so that's all good. Now it's stuck. But at this point, it's obvious that some parts of this aren't really working out the way I want. In particular, the window's not showing the state of the background, and the wheel wells look a little funny. So in previous versions of Resolve, I only had one each of each curve. Now, I have as many of any kind of window as I want. So I can add another curve. I'm going to add that here. I'm going to punch out that window. And furthermore, I don't even have to track twice, because I can copy the track data from the one curve, paste it to the next, and now those are all together. And I can keep going. So I'll go ahead and turn on one circular for the one wheel well, and I'll paste the track data. I can create another circle. I'm no longer limited to one at a time. And I'll paste that track data. And in one fell swoop, I'm all set. Done. And then if I really want to go to town, I can go ahead and rearrange this, add an outside node, and in the outside node, I can do whatever crazy madness I was planning on. Done. So, that's a huge improvement over previous versions. And incidentally, this is the kind of thing that's going to save you mouse clicks. Lots and lots of mouse clicks, so it's a very good thing. Some other fun tools I'd like to show you. There's a new ability to split the channels in interesting ways. And for this, once again, I'm going to zoom in on this image. I'm going to add another node. And in this node, if I right-click it, you'll notice there are these new channel controls, channel 1, 2, and 3. I can turn off channels that I don't want this node to act upon. And beyond that, I can actually switch color spaces. So I can set this node to work in YUV color space. Now in YUV color space, channel 1 is the Y channel, so I've now set this node up to only work on the Y channel, and if I jump into my blur palette, you can now see that I'm blurring or sharpening just the luma. So I could do this before. It required a few nodes of setup. Now it's 2 mouse clicks and I have exactly what I need, and it's a very easy step to remember. So that's a big deal. But another fun thing you can do is if I go into the Nodes window, menu, I can choose Add Splitter Combiner Node. And this actually gives me a whole structure that physically splits out each color channel into an individual branch of the node tree. And I'm going to use this to demonstrate another new feature, which is in the sizing palette, which is per node sizing controls. So I can now select this channel and say, pan it over. Select that color channel, pan it over. Maybe I want to take that third channel and zoom into it a little bit to create a really cool graphic look. Maybe this is the beginning of some sort of title treatment. Doing the opposite of this, if I'm bringing some tape back from archival and it's misaligned, the channels are misaligned, I could use this same tool to try and line those up a little bit better. So this is both corrective and crazy all at the same time. However, this is also cumulative. So if I select the combiner node and add another node after that, say the director doesn't like this fringing I've got on the edge, I can go ahead and just do a little zoom bump in, crop that out. So really, really finicky control over your image in a very simple, straightforward way. So that's very cool. Now, to show off a few other features that, again, I didn't get a chance to do at NAB, I'm going to go ahead and switch projects. So I'm going to open this one up. Resolve's going to complain a little bit because it's a, did I mention this is a pre-release version? So in this first shot, I'm going to take the opportunity to show you one of the more drastic changes in DaVinci Resolve, and that is OpenFX plugin support. How many of you know GenArts Sapphire plugins? Raise your hand. Well, you can now get an OpenFX version of GenArts Sapphire plugins that works from directly within Resolve. And the cool thing about that, if I drop down here to their lighting plugins, it's a set of like 280-odd effects plugins that are really high-powered. They've been used on the biggest movies you've seen. And they do things like this. Add all kinds of crazy glow and optical effects, warping effects, stylization effects that would be difficult, if not impossible. In fact, this is patently impossible to do just using the native tools in Resolve. So now, if you need some kind of crazy glow, you can add OpenFX plugins to any node. They expose the graphical controls, so I can edit them using the on-screen controls, or I can use all of the sliders that they provide as part of that plugin. And this is cumulative. So I can add another node, and say the director really likes this but wants more of an old-timey look. So I get asked, well, can you do film damage? Now, literally last year, twice during gigs, I had clients ask me, can you add some film damage, scratches and things? And I said, well, no, that's not really something I can do directly in Resolve without some additional footage. But we can do it in a compositing application and blah, blah, blah. It's a whole conversation. Now, I can go into the Stylize section and find film damage, drop that on a second node. I've got my effect, and the Sapphire film damage effect is really great. If I drop down, I can add things like stains. I can add stains to the negative, which appear white. I can add dust in varying degrees, and same thing. I can add dust on the negative. This is the opposite of dust busting. I can add hair if I want to be really gross. I've got scratches. I mean, I can just go nuts. And the other thing I want to bring to your attention is this all works in conjunction with the tools that DaVinci already has. So just like I wouldn't attempt to create a high style look just with one node ordinarily, I'm not just going to rely on my filters to do all the work for me. Now I can go in to the curves, say I can lift the blacks a little bit. I can start doing some funny asymmetrical curve adjustments. Maybe I want to drop the blue from up there push a little funniness, create the illusion that the channels, the actual color channels, have degraded. And now I have a much fuller effect. I go before and after. You can see the sort of thing I'm doing. Now, I'll call to your attention, you're probably wondering why aren't the Just and Scratches moving? It's because it's a pre-release version. So eventually all these effects will be animated. And by the way, here's the last example I'll show you, because this is another really fun thing that's very easy to do with Sapphire that's a little more challenging to do in other ways. I've got this shot of a car. I'm going to go ahead and keep it cool. Maybe bump up the contrast a little bit. I want an early morning look. Play around with the pivot, darken it up a little bit. So I've got a nice look for this car going, but it lacks a certain pizzazz. So, of course, the client says, hey, can you give me a lens flare? Because we all love lens flares, and I say, sure. Sure I can. But I am going to look for lens flare auto track. And what's cool about lens flare auto track, first off, I'm going to pick just the right flare. So I'm going to load one of the presets. Sapphire comes with a ton of different lens flare presets. And by the way, I'm told they just rebuilt their engine. They actually filmed using a variety of lenses, both classic lenses and really modern lenses, and scanned in painstakingly each element of each lens flare so they could reconstruct it. And I'm going to choose anamorphic 1, because who doesn't like an anamorphic lens flare? Now, here's what's cool about this particular plugin. I can alter the threshold to lock that flare to the brightest thing in the picture. So now, as I pan around, you can see that the flare is following the light. I can increase the number of hotspots if I want to be really crazy. Now, of course, this is ridiculous, right? Nobody should want this, which is why Sapphire gives you all of these parameters. So I can go ahead and blur that out. I can drop the scale a little bit. And now I have a really nice, it's still very stylized, it still looks cool, but it's a little more of a naturalistic special effect. And I didn't have to do any keyframing. And again, lens flare elements, not really an easy thing to do just using the base Resolve toolkit. So OpenFX plugin support is a really big deal as far as I'm concerned. And it's an open standard. So if you have a vendor of plugins that you really like in other applications, now's a good time to send them an email and say, hey guys, if you haven't thought about doing some OpenFX plugins, maybe you want to do it now. Because OpenFX plugin compatibility is also going to be available on the light version of DaVinci Resolve. So there you go. So one other fun thing that I neglected to show before, and I'm going to go to full screen mode. If I go back to the windowing palette, this is a quickie, and it's a fun one because this is an F65 clip with all that latitude that F65 clips gives you. And of course, I've got this blown out window. So I'm grading the raw clip, and here's a good example of the value of raw now that I have a new gradient window. So the gradient window is a new kind of window. It's basically just a big strip, and it's got two controls, position and rotation and fall off. And so with this setup, I can go ahead and just drop that gain down, bring in all my detail, adjust that boundary to have as much or as little fall off as I want, and I'm done. No more fiddling around with rectangles all of the time. This is another thing that's going to save you a lot of mouse clicks every single day. But wait, there's more. I haven't even gotten to the optical tools yet, and this will conclude my demonstration. Again, this is another thing I wasn't able to show at NAB, but this is some really cool stuff. So I'm going to open this up. Incidentally, these optical tools are the only thing that I'm showing you that's not going to be available in the light version. For this, you'll have to buy the full version, and you may find that you want to. So starting out with this clip, I'm going to reset the whole thing. I'm going to start with the base of it. And scrubbing forward, I'm going to zoom in because I want to focus your attention on the noise. So am I zoomed in enough to see the noise and grain in the shot? Okay, good. So Resolve already had a noise reduction filter, but it was a little hit and miss. It either worked really well or it didn't work at all in terms of quality. That's changed. So Resolve 10 has a new spatial and temporal based noise reduction filter. I'm going to start with the temporal. So I'm going to set the number of frames to 2. And I'm going to raise the threshold to the point where it starts filtering out some of that noise. It's subtle. So if I do before and after, you can see that it's tackling the noise in areas of low detail, and it's doing it by pulling in data from multiple frames. So if you look at areas where the spotlight are, it's preserving detail where it really needs to, and getting rid of noise where it's easy to do. On top of that, I can go ahead and add spatial noise reduction, and now I'm really hitting the signal to clean it up. And again, if I go before and after, you can see how good the preservation of detail is as I jack this up. Calling your attention to the buildings. Pretty nice, huh? In addition, you can break the link between the lumic threshold and the chroma threshold. So if you've got a lot of noise in the chroma, but you don't want to ding the luma so much, you can actually create an asymmetrical adjustment that focuses more on color noise than on luma noise. So if there's a little bit of grain you want to preserve, that's a good way to do it. So it's become a much more detailed tool to use than previous versions. And if I zoom out a little bit and do a before and after, you can see the result on the wider shot. So you can really dial in exactly the kind of noise reduction you need. That's cool. One other thing I'd like to show you. You know how every once in a while you've been given a shot and the shutter speed wasn't quite right, so it's a little bit stroby. One of the new tools that they've added is a motion blur tool, which allows you to add artificial motion blur based on motion estimation. So in this clip, I've got this woman swirling her glass. And it already has decent blur, but the client really wants a more ghostly treatment of that. You know, something to bring attention to the glass. So I can go ahead and jack up motion blur to the point where I've really got a substantive floating blur. And it's almost real time. Again, remember, this is an iMac I'm running on, not a high-powered Mac Pro with a huge graphics card. So this is pretty good. However, the motion blur is now hitting her face as it moves back and forth, and that's not necessarily something I want. An important thing to keep in mind about all of these tools, the OpenFX and the noise reduction and the motion blur is they can all be limited, just like every other tool in DaVinci. So if I turn on a circular window and drag it over the glass, I now have a situation where the glass is being blurred, but nothing else is. Except for a finger, and I can fix that. But I can do the same thing with noise reduction. If there are parts of the picture I want to exclude from noise reduction, I can do so. And I can do that with all of the OpenFX plugins. So it's all nicely integrated. None of these new tools work differently than any of the other tools in the nodes, and you can use all the same node structures that you're used to. So this release adds a lot of power to Resolve. If you like what you've seen, keep in mind that the overall UI of this version is not vastly different from that of Resolve 9. So if you want to get started learning this now, I do have some training that I do through Ripple Training, both for basic overall training and for a detailed look at how to create some special effects. That's a place you can go, and there are numerous other training resources available on the web as well. So anyway, I hope that was fun. Thanks a lot.